You find yourself, perhaps a bit dusty and disoriented, standing on the precipice of an age-long past, where the very concept of China as a singular entity was still a fragmented dream, a wistful whisper carried on the wind. Imagine, if you will, a land carved into a patchwork quilt of warring fiefdoms, each vying for supremacy, their borders shifting like sand dunes in a relentless desert storm. This wasn't just a squabble between neighbors. This was a brutal, existential dance where survival hinged on cunning, strength, and a healthy dose of ruthlessness. You breathe in the smoky air, thick with the scent of fear, ambition, and the ever-present threat of conflict. This is the Warring States period, a grand, messy prelude to something truly monumental. You're not just an observer here, you're an almost invisible participant, feeling the tremors of distant battles underfoot, hearing the clang of bronze and iron carried on the breeze. Think of it like a particularly intense season finale of a geopolitical reality show, but with far more blood, less manufactured drama, and absolutely no commercial breaks. 7 major states dominate the landscape: Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and of course, Qin. Each with its own customs, its own armies, its own philosophies, and its own deeply held conviction that they were the rightful inheritors of heaven's mandate. You see the farmers tilling their fields, ever watchful, their lives dictated by the whims of distant warlords. You see merchants haggling in bustling market towns, their fortunes often tied to the latest military campaign. It's a vibrant, terrifying kaleidoscope of human existence, perpetually teetering on the edge. Now, among these contenders, one state begins to stand out, like a particularly muscular kid in a playground brawl. That's Qin. To the west, often dismissed by the more civilized eastern states as a bit rough around the edges, a bit barbarian. But you quickly learn that rough around the edges often translates to unburdened by tradition and surprisingly effective. While other states were perhaps still debating the finer points of ritual etiquette or composing elegant odes, Qin was busy reforming its laws, reorganizing its military, and generally getting down to the brass tacks of conquering its neighbors. It's like watching a startup disrupt an established industry. Everyone else is still using floppy disks, while Qin is already on the cloud. You notice the quiet efficiency of Qin's administration, a stark contrast to the often bloated bureaucracies elsewhere. They've embraced something called legalism, which, to put it mildly, isn't about fuzzy feelings and group hugs. It's about strict laws, harsh punishments, and absolute loyalty to the state. Imagine a rulebook so comprehensive, so unyielding, that even stepping on a crack in the pavement could theoretically land you in hot water. Okay, maybe not that strict, but you get the idea. You see the public display of punishments, designed not just to deter crime, but to instill a pervasive sense of order. It's an iron fist in an iron glove, and it's remarkably effective at keeping the population in line and focused on contributing to the state's power. You might wonder, walking through a Qin village, why everyone seems so disciplined, so quiet. It's not just the fear of punishment, though. That certainly plays a part. It's also the promise of land for those who fight well, the promise of advancement for those who serve the state, the promise that their sacrifices are building something greater. While other states might have clung to old feudal structures, Qin was busy dismantling them, replacing hereditary power with a meritocracy of sorts, at least for those who could wield a sword or manage a granary efficiently. It's a ruthless pragmatism that feels surprisingly modern, almost like a corporate efficiency drive, but with spears. As you wander through the countryside, you sometimes stumble upon the remnants of a battle. A broken spearhead, half buried in the soil, a shard of pottery, perhaps even an unquiet spirit still lingering. The sheer scale of the conflict is staggering. Historians still argue whether the cumulative casualties of the Warring States period truly dwarfed those of later global conflicts, but the sheer, relentless attrition was undeniable. Armies of hundreds of thousands clashed, their movements dictating the fates of entire populations. You realize that peace, for the people of this era, was less a state of being and more a temporary ceasefire, a fragile lull before the next storm. You might overhear snippets of conversation in a roadside inn, hushed whispers about the latest strategic maneuvers, the rise of a new general, or the fall of a once proud city. There's a palpable sense of anticipation, a feeling that something big is coming, that this endless cycle of warfare must eventually reach a climax. You see the weary faces of refugees, their homes consumed by the ever-expanding appetites of warring lords. You also see the glint in the eyes of young men, eager to prove themselves in battle, lured by the promise of glory, or, at the very least, a better life than farming rocks. It's a land both weary of war and strangely addicted to it, where the very act of living is a constant negotiation with violence. One quirky tidbit you might notice is the elaborate system of administrative divisions. Qin, unlike some of its neighbors, was not afraid to micromanage. They divided their territory into commanderies and then those into counties, each with its own appointed officials. It was a bureaucratic spiderweb, designed to ensure that no corner of the state was beyond the reach of the central authority. It's a testament to their organizational prowess, even if it meant a lot of paperwork. You can almost hear the scribes complaining about carpal tunnel syndrome. If only carpal tunnel syndrome had been invented yet. So, as you stand here, watching the setting sun cast long shadows over this divided land, you feel the tension building. The stage is set. The other states, for all their ancient glory and refined culture, are looking increasingly like dinosaurs facing an asteroid. Qin, on the other hand, is evolving, adapting, becoming something new and terrifyingly efficient. You can practically hear the ticking clock, counting down to the moment when this fractured landscape will finally, irrevocably, be forced into a single, cohesive shape. The unification isn't just an idea anymore. It's a rapidly approaching reality, driven by the relentless, grinding engine of Qin. You feel a shiver, not from the evening chill, but from the sense of momentous change hanging heavy in the air. The long night of war is drawing to a close, but the dawn promises a very different kind of world. As the dust of the Warring States period begins to settle, albeit reluctantly, your focus narrows to a figure who will irrevocably alter the course of history, Yingzheng. Imagine a young man, barely into his teens, thrust onto a throne in a kingdom known for its ruthlessness and its ambition. This isn't your typical story of a pampered prince. Zheng's childhood was likely a turbulent affair, steeped in court intrigue and political maneuvering. He ascends to power amidst a viper's nest of factions, each vying for influence, each testing the mettle of this fledgling ruler. You can almost feel the tension in the royal palace, the hushed whispers, the hidden daggers. It's like being trapped in the most cutthroat reality show, but the eliminations are far more permanent than just being voted off an island. Historians still argue whether Yingzheng's early years were truly as precarious as some accounts suggest, or if much of the drama was later exaggerated to heighten his legendary status. Nevertheless, the challenges he faced were immense. He inherited a state that was powerful, yes, but also surrounded by jealous rivals and riddled with internal power struggles. The narrative of his youth is often overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of his later achievements, but it's crucial to remember that the seeds of his unyielding will were sown in these early, challenging years. He learned quickly that power was not given. It was seized, defended, and expanded with an iron grip. You see him, a young man, perhaps a bit awkward in his royal robes, but with eyes that betray an unnerving intensity. He's not just a figurehead, he's a student of statecraft, learning from his advisors, dissecting the strategies of his enemies. There's a widely known story about a regent, Lu Buwei, who initially held significant sway over the young king. Lu Buwei was a cunning merchant who parlayed his wealth into political power, even allegedly orchestrating Yingzheng's path to the throne. You might observe the subtle power plays between them, the polite deferrals that mask underlying currents of ambition. It's a delicate dance where each misstep could mean oblivion. One quirky tidbit: Lu Buwei was supposedly so influential, he sponsored a massive compilation of scholarship and philosophy known as the Lu Shi Chun Qiu, or Spring and Autumn Annals of Master Lu, a testament to his intellectual, not just political, aspirations. Imagine your stepdad writing an encyclopedia in his spare time. But Zheng isn't one to remain in anyone's shadow for long. You witness his gradual assertion of authority, a quiet tightening of the reins. There's an episode where he publicly dismisses Lu Buwei, stripping him of his power and eventually sending him into exile. The official reasons might be vague, but the message is clear. Zheng is his own man, and he tolerates no rivals for control. This isn't just a political maneuver, it's a psychological one. He's demonstrating to his court and to the world that he is the ultimate authority, and deviation from his will carries severe consequences. You might feel a chill down your spine as you observe this cold, calculated consolidation of power. His consolidation wasn't just about eliminating rivals. It was about truly understanding and mastering the legalist doctrines that Qin had already embraced. You might recall from our last chat how legalism was all about strict laws and absolute state control. Zheng doesn't just pay lip service to these ideas, he embodies them. He sees the chaos of the warring states as a direct consequence of weakness, of outdated traditions, of anything less than total centralized power. He believes with an almost religious fervor that only through a brutally efficient, unified system can true order and prosperity be achieved. You see him poring over administrative reports, meticulously planning military campaigns, his mind a steel trap of logic and strategy. This era of consolidation isn't glamorous. It's the grinding, methodical work of bureaucracy and quiet ruthlessness. You observe how he empowers loyal officials, often those from humble backgrounds who owe their entire careers to him, over the entrenched aristocracy. This shakes up the old power structures and ensures that loyalty is directed vertically, straight to the top, rather than horizontally to ancient noble families. It's a very clever move, if a little terrifying for anyone who prefers the status quo. He's essentially saying, "Forget your ancestors. What have you done for me lately?" The reforms he oversees aren't just administrative. They're designed to mobilize the entire Qin state for war. You see the strict census taking, allowing the state to know exactly how many able-bodied men can be conscripted. You observe the emphasis on agricultural output, ensuring that the armies are fed and supplied. Every aspect of life, from farming to fighting, is viewed through the lens of strengthening the state and preparing for conquest. It's a national machine, finely tuned and ready for deployment. This relentless focus on efficiency and expansion is what truly sets Qin apart. While other states were perhaps still arguing about the best way to brew tea, Qin was perfecting its war machine. Think of it like a massive corporate restructuring, but instead of layoffs and mergers, it involves armies and executions. Yingzheng understood that ultimate power required ultimate control, and that control began at home. He doesn't just rule, he orchestrates. He is the conductor of a vast, complex orchestra, and every single instrument, every single musician must play precisely the note he dictates. Deviate, and you're out of the band, permanently. You might hear whispers of his growing paranoia, even at this early stage. The weight of absolute power, the constant threat of assassination, the need to maintain an iron grip. It would make anyone a little twitchy. You notice the tightening security around the palace, the layers of guards, the scrutinizing gazes. It's not just about protection. It's about projecting an aura of invulnerability. He's not just a king. He's becoming a force of nature, a living embodiment of the state's will. By the time he reaches full maturity, Yingzheng is no longer a young king, learning the ropes. He is a hardened ruler, decisive and unyielding. He has purged his court of rivals, brought the administrative machinery fully under his control, and molded Qin into the most formidable military power in the land. He has eliminated the threats within, leaving him free to focus on the threats without. The stage is now perfectly set for the grand drama of unification. You can feel the collective breath of the other states, held in a moment of uneasy calm before the storm breaks. This isn't just about conquering territories. It's about imposing a singular vision, a singular will on a fractured world. And that will belongs unequivocally to Yingzheng. With Yingzheng's grip on power firmly established, you now observe the full, uncompromising force of legalism being unleashed across the state of Qin. This wasn't just a philosophy, it was an operating system for an empire designed for maximum efficiency and absolute control. Forget ancient Greek debates about democracy or Confucian ideals of benevolent rule. In Qin, the only debate was how to best serve the state, and dissent was definitely not on the agenda. You feel the palpable shift in the air, a tightening of discipline that permeates every level of society. It's like a corporate takeover, but instead of synergistic mergers, you get severe punishments and a truly unified company culture. The chief architect of this ruthless system, though he lived before Zheng's full reign, was Yang. Imagine a brilliant, utterly pragmatic legal scholar, devoid of sentimentality, who believed that human nature was inherently selfish and therefore needed strict laws and strong incentives to behave. His reforms, implemented generations before, had already set Qin on its unique path. You see the echoes of his thought everywhere, in the precise division of land, encouraging agricultural output, in the strict household registration, knowing exactly who lived where and how many soldiers could be mustered, and especially in the concept of mutual responsibility, where families and neighbors were held accountable for each other's adherence to the law. It's like a neighborhood watch program gone global, with far higher stakes. Legalism, as you experience it, is less about morality and more about utility. The law is not there to make you a good person. It's there to make you a productive citizen of Qin. Merit is measured not by your ancestry or your poetic prowess, but by your contribution to the state's wealth and military power. This meant that a common farmer who produced abundant grain or a foot soldier who took an enemy head in battle could gain status and reward, potentially even rising higher than a languishing nobleman. This was revolutionary and deeply unsettling to the old aristocracy, but it was incredibly effective at motivating the populace. It's like a particularly aggressive performance review system, but the bonus is your life, and the penalty for underperforming is, well, not your life, but possibly something equally unpleasant. You notice the public proclamations of laws, often carved on stone stelae in town squares, leaving no room for ignorance. These aren't suggestions, they are commands, enforced with an unblinking eye. Punishments are severe and often disproportionate to the crime by modern standards. Minor infractions, like being late for work or littering, could lead to hard labor or even mutilation. Major crimes, naturally, meant death. The intent wasn't just to punish the individual, but to serve as a stark warning to everyone else. You might wince at the sight of public floggings or the branded faces of petty criminals, grim reminders of the system's unyielding nature. Yet, ironically, this very harshness also fostered a certain kind of order. Historians still argue whether the perceived stability under legalism was truly preferable to the constant warfare it replaced. But for many, a harsh peace was better than constant conflict. One quirky tidbit about legalism. There was a strong emphasis on suppressing private enterprise and independent thought that didn't serve the state. Merchants were often viewed with suspicion, as they created wealth that wasn't directly controlled by the government. Scholars who promoted ideas contrary to legalist tenets were actively discouraged, sometimes brutally. It's almost as if the state wanted to be the only show in town, the only valid source of information, and the only legitimate career path. You might find it stifling, this lack of intellectual freedom, but it was all part of the grand plan to direct all human energy towards state building. You observe the system of military meritocracy, a cornerstone of legalist ideology. Instead of feudal levies, where loyalty was to a lord, Qin soldiers fought for the state, and their advancement was directly tied to their performance on the battlefield. A common soldier could literally rise through the ranks based on how many enemy heads he presented after a battle. Yes, it was that grimly direct. This created an incredibly motivated and utterly ruthless fighting force. You see the gleaming spears, the disciplined formations, the grim determination on the faces of the Qin soldiers. They aren't just fighting for their lives, they are fighting for their future, their family's future, all dictated by a system that rewards victory and punishes failure with brutal efficiency. Even everyday life is structured by legalism. You see farmers diligently tending their fields, knowing that their harvest will be meticulously assessed for taxes and state granaries. You see craftsmen producing tools and weapons, their output directly contributing to the state's military might. There's a pervasive sense of purpose, even if that purpose is dictated from above. It's a society designed to be a machine, with every individual a cog in its relentless gears. The very concept of individual rights, as we understand it today, is entirely absent. Your rights derive from your duties to the state, and if you fail in those duties, you lose everything. It's a chilling thought, but in the context of a century of brutal warfare, this absolute order, this singular focus, must have appealed to many. The promise was simple: give up your individual freedoms, and the state will deliver peace, security, and strength. For people weary of chaos, this was a powerful, if Faustian, bargain. You might feel the weight of this system, the lack of personal space, the constant surveillance by officials, the fear of informers. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we didn't actually talk about? Well, imagine a world where forgetting your sunscreen could be a state offense. Okay, that's a joke, but it gets the point across about the pervasive control. Yet, you also cannot deny its effectiveness. This unyielding implementation of legalist principles is what allowed Qin to organize its vast resources, mobilize its massive armies, and ultimately set the stage for its astonishing conquests. It transformed a strong state into an unstoppable force, a battering ram poised to smash through the remnants of the old world. The relentless machinery of Qin, fueled by legalist doctrines and guided by Yingzheng's singular will, now reaches its inevitable crescendo. You are about to witness the moment when a king transcends his title and claims a destiny far grander, the declaration of the first emperor. Imagine the scene, not a quiet coronation, but a thunderous proclamation that reverberates across the unified lands, shattering millennia of tradition and establishing a completely new paradigm of power. This isn't just a rebranding, it's a fundamental redefinition of rulership. After the final conquest of the last rival state, Qi, in 221 BCE, the long bloody saga of the Warring States period finally, definitively ends. The entire land, from the northern steppes to the southern rivers, is now under one banner, the Black Standard of Qin. You stand in the capital, Xianyang, feeling the palpable exhilaration and trepidation in the air. The former states are no more. Their ruling houses are deposed, their territories absorbed. This unprecedented achievement demands an unprecedented title. A mere king simply won't do. How could a man who had united all under heaven be equated with the petty kings he had just crushed? This is where the term Huangdi comes into play. It's a compound title, deliberately crafted to evoke a sense of divine authority and ancient legitimacy. Huang refers to the legendary three sovereigns, mythical rulers of China's earliest antiquity, often associated with semi-divine powers and the creation of civilization itself. Di refers to the five emperors, also legendary figures, revered for their wisdom and moral rectitude. believed to have ruled during a golden age. By combining these two exalted terms, Yingzheng wasn't just saying he was a great king. He was proclaiming himself to be more than a king, the first of a new lineage of rulers whose authority stemmed directly from the heavens, a figure of cosmic significance. You can practically hear the mic drop. You are there as the assembled officials, perhaps still reeling from the sheer audacity of it all, pay homage. The atmosphere is charged. This isn't just ceremony, it's a political statement of immense gravity. He is no longer King Zheng of Qin. He is Qin Shi Huangdi, meaning first emperor of Qin. The Shi is critical. It signifies he is the beginning of something entirely new, the inaugural emperor, implying that his reign inaugurates a dynasty of similarly exalted rulers that would last for 10,000 generations. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite make it to 10,000, but the ambition was certainly there. This declaration marks the formal birth of imperial China. For over 2 millennia, the title of Emperor, Huangdi, would be the supreme designation for China's rulers. Every subsequent dynasty, from the Han to the Qing, would adopt this title, acknowledging Qin Shi Huang's foundational act. You can almost feel the weight of this historical moment, the turning of a page in the grand book of human civilization. It's like witnessing the signing of a new constitution, but one written in fire and blood, backed by the largest army the world had ever seen. The implications of this new title are profound. It means absolute, unchallenged authority. The emperor is the son of heaven, mediating between the celestial and terrestrial realms. His word is law. His will is supreme. You observe the awe, the fear, and perhaps a flicker of resentment in the eyes of the officials. They know that the stakes have just been raised exponentially. A misstep, a perceived slight, could now incur not just a king's displeasure, but a divine wrath. One mainstream historical fact that encapsulates this moment is the abolition of the old feudal system. Qin Shi Huang didn't just conquer the states, he dismantled them. He abolished the hereditary aristocratic titles and divided the entire empire into a system of commanderies and counties, administered by centrally appointed officials who were directly loyal to him. You see maps being redrawn, old boundaries erased, new administrative centers established. This was a direct assault on the power base of the old nobility, ensuring that no regional lord could ever again challenge the central authority. It's like replacing a tangled web of independent franchises with a single, massive, centrally controlled corporation. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates his meticulous nature and desire for control. Qin Shi Huang reportedly ordered the collection and melting down of all bronze weapons from the conquered states. This bronze was then used to cast massive bells and 12 colossal statues, each weighing thousands of pounds, which were displayed in his capital. Imagine the sheer logistical challenge of collecting, transporting, and melting down weapons from an entire continent. It was a powerful, symbolic act, disarming the populace and showcasing the overwhelming power of the new regime. It was a clear message. The only weapons allowed were those in the hands of the emperor's army. Historians still argue whether Qin Shi Huang's personal megalomania or a genuine belief in his divine mandate was the primary driver behind his adoption of the Huangdi title. Was it pure ambition, a strategic move to solidify power, or a deep-seated conviction that he was indeed chosen by heaven for this monumental task? The answer, perhaps, lies in a complex blend of all three, but the effect was undeniable. He became more than a man. He became an institution. You see the immediate changes that accompany this new imperial reality. The imperial court swells with officials, advisors, and eunuchs. Protocols become more rigid, ceremonies more elaborate. The emperor begins to live an increasingly secluded life, shrouded in mystery and protected by layers of security. He travels less, or at least his movements become more secret, to guard against assassination. The burden of universal rule weighs heavily, and the paranoia that had begun to simmer in his youth now starts to fully take root. As you stand there, watching the banners flutter and the imperial decrees being read, you feel the profound shift. The familiar world of warring kingdoms is gone, replaced by a single, vast, unified empire. This isn't just a political change. It's a cultural, social, and psychological transformation. The people are no longer subjects of this king or that duke. They are now simply subjects of the emperor. It's a moment of awe-inspiring power, but also one that hints at the immense, often brutal consequences that would come with such absolute authority. The first emperor has arrived, and with him, a new era begins. With the new title of Qin Shi Huangdi echoing across the land, you now join the imperial forces as they complete the astonishing feat of conquest of the 6 states. This wasn't a single, swift campaign, but a methodical, brutal war that stretched over a decade, culminating in the complete subjugation of every rival. You feel the ground tremble under the marching legions of Qin, an unstoppable tide of disciplined warriors, relentless in their pursuit of total victory. It's like watching a master strategist play the ultimate game of chess, where every move is calculated, every sacrifice weighed, and the endgame is total domination. Remember how Qin had already embraced legalist principles, building a powerful, centralized state and a highly motivated army. Now you see the fruits of that labor. The Qin military machine was truly unprecedented in its scale and organization. They were equipped with superior iron weaponry. Their logistics were meticulously planned, and their commanders were often appointed based on merit, not birthright. You witness the sheer force of their attacks, not just brute strength, but also sophisticated siege tactics, diversionary maneuvers, and an uncanny ability to exploit the weaknesses of their adversaries. The strategy was simple, yet devastating. Defeat each state in succession, isolating them and preventing any effective alliances. The Qin began by chipping away at the weakest states like Han and Wei, turning their full might against them. You might see the faces of despair in the conquered cities, the silent resignation of a people whose long-cherished independence has been brutally extinguished. It's a grim reminder that unification, while bringing an end to endless war, often arrived on the back of immense suffering. One mainstream historical fact about these conquests is the sheer scale of the armies involved. Records suggest that battles could involve hundreds of thousands of soldiers on each side. Imagine the logistical nightmare, feeding, arming, and moving such vast numbers of people across diverse terrains. The Qin excelled at this, demonstrating an organizational capacity that dwarfed their rivals. You might see the long supply lines, the relentless march of foot soldiers, the constant movement of chariots and cavalry. It's a testament to the fact that wars are won not just by brave warriors, but by incredibly efficient quartermasters. The conquest of Zhao, a northern state with a formidable cavalry, was particularly hard fought. You might witness the prolonged sieges, the desperate counterattacks, the sheer attrition of bodies and will. But even the fiercest resistance eventually crumbled under the sustained pressure of Qin's relentless advance. It's like trying to hold back a tsunami with a sandcastle. Eventually, the sheer volume of water will overwhelm you. Then came Chu, the largest and most sprawling of the remaining states, a powerful kingdom to the south. This was the heavyweight fight, the clash of titans. Chu was vast, rich in resources, and its people were known for their fierce independence. Qin initially underestimated Chu, suffering a significant setback, but they learned quickly. You observe the Qin strategists adapting, employing new tactics, and finally, after years of grueling campaigns, breaking the back of Chu's resistance. It's a reminder that even the most powerful empire can stumble, but true strength lies in the ability to learn and recover. Yan, in the northeast, was another target. There's a famous, somewhat romanticized, but definitely quirky tidbit associated with the attempted assassination of Qin Shi Huang by Jing Ke, a retainer from Yan. Jing Ke, disguised as an envoy bearing a map of Yan's territory, concealed a poisoned dagger within the scroll. The plan was to unroll the map, reveal the dagger, and kill the king. You might imagine the heart-stopping moment in the Qin court, the sudden attack, the king desperately fumbling for his sword, which, rather comically, was too long to draw quickly from its scabbard, and the intervention of his physicians who threw a bag of medicine at the assassin. The attempt failed. Jing Ke was killed, and the enraged Qin Shi Huang unleashed the full fury of his armies on Yan, wiping it from the map. It's a tale that highlights both the emperor's vulnerability and his terrifying resolve. Historians still argue whether this assassination attempt genuinely solidified his paranoia or merely confirmed a pre-existing disposition. Finally, in 221 BCE, the last bastion of resistance, the state of Qi, capitulated without a major fight. Perhaps they had seen enough. Perhaps they recognized the futility of further bloodshed. You stand as the formal surrender is announced, a quiet end to centuries of conflict. The sound of silence, after so much clangor and chaos, must have been deafening. The entire known world, all under heaven, was now one. This period of conquest wasn't just about military might, it was also about psychological warfare and political maneuvering. Qin often employed agents to sow discord within rival states, bribing officials, spreading rumors, and encouraging defections. They understood that a kingdom divided against itself was easier to conquer. You might see the subtle machinations, the whispers in the shadows, the carefully orchestrated betrayals that weakened the enemy from within before the armies even arrived. As the last banners of resistance fall, you feel a peculiar mix of relief and dread. The Warring States period, with its endless bloodshed and instability, is finally over. A unified realm has emerged, promising an end to the ceaseless violence. But at what cost? The scale of the violence, the ruthlessness of the Qin, the sheer power concentrated in one man's hands, These are questions that linger. The unification is complete, but the hard part, the challenge of governing this vast new empire, has only just begun. The foundation has been laid, forged in blood and iron, for what will become imperial China. But the nature of that empire remains to be seen. The dust from the final conquests settles, and you find yourself no longer amidst the chaos of battlefields, but within the newly unified realm, observing the ambitious project of centralization and control. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, wasn't content with merely conquering. He intended to utterly transform the vast territories he now ruled into a single, cohesive, and utterly subservient entity. This wasn't just about putting his name on a map. It was about knitting together disparate cultures, languages, and loyalties into one unified fabric, all under his absolute command. It's like taking a dozen different puzzle boxes, dumping all the pieces together, and then demanding that they all fit into one giant, perfectly formed picture frame. Good luck. The first, and perhaps most critical step, as we briefly touched upon, was the complete abolition of the old feudal system. Remember those independent dukes and lords, each with their own territories and private armies? Gone. You see imperial decrees being read, stripping the old aristocrats of their hereditary lands and political power. Many of them were forcibly relocated to the capital, Xianyang, where they could be kept under the emperor's watchful eye. This eliminated any potential pockets of resistance or rival power bases that could challenge the central authority. It's a ruthless but highly effective strategy, akin to disarming your entire competitive set and then inviting them to live in your penthouse. In their place, the emperor imposed a rigid, hierarchical system of commanderies, Jieyun, and counties, Xian. You witness the map of China being carved up into these new administrative divisions, each governed by centrally appointed officials. These officials, unlike the old feudal lords, were not hereditary. Their positions were based on merit, or at least their loyalty and efficiency, and they could be transferred, promoted, or dismissed at the emperor's will. This ensured that every part of the vast empire was directly managed by the imperial bureaucracy, sending information and resources straight to the capital. It's the ultimate top-down management system, with zero room for middle management to do anything but execute orders. You might feel the reach of this new administrative network extending into every village and hamlet. Census takers move through the land, meticulously recording populations, land ownership, and resources. Tax collectors, operating under strict imperial guidelines, ensure that the state's coffers are filled. You see roads being built, facilitating the rapid movement of troops and goods, but also allowing imperial edicts to reach the furthest corners of the empire with unprecedented speed. This infrastructure wasn't just for convenience, it was the sinews of imperial control, strengthening the central government's grip. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this centralization is the relocation of the ruling families from the conquered states to Xianyang. Around 120,000 households of the most prominent and wealthy families were moved to the capital, forcing them to abandon their traditional power bases and live under direct imperial surveillance. Imagine uprooting an entire aristocracy and making them your next-door neighbors. It was a powerful symbolic gesture, demonstrating that the old world was truly dead and all power now flowed from the imperial center. The emperor also recognized the importance of standardizing law. While legalism was already the official doctrine of Qin, its full application across the newly unified empire required systematic implementation. You see legal codes being promulgated, uniform punishments for crimes, and a clear, explicit set of rules that applied to everyone, everywhere. This wasn't about local customs or regional interpretations. It was about one law for one empire, enforced with an unyielding hand. This consistency, while harsh, did bring a degree of predictability that was perhaps welcome after centuries of fragmented and often arbitrary local rule. A quirky tidbit you might observe is the focus on erasing regional identities. Qin Shi Huang understood that loyalty to the old states was a threat to his new empire. He didn't just abolish their administrations, he actively sought to diminish their cultural distinctiveness. Local dialects were discouraged in official communications, and a common script was promoted. More on that later. While it's impossible to completely erase centuries of cultural heritage overnight, the imperial machinery certainly tried to homogenize the vast and varied peoples under its rule. Imagine trying to get everyone in Europe to speak the same language and celebrate the same holidays. That's the kind of ambition we're talking about here. Historians still argue whether this aggressive cultural assimilation was a purely practical measure for control or also driven by a genuine belief in a singular, unified Chinese identity that predated his reign. The control extended even to personal lives. You might see the implementation of a universal conscription system for military service and forced labor, drawing men from all parts of the empire for massive public works projects. These men weren't just Qin subjects, they were now imperial subjects, obligated to serve the emperor's grand visions, regardless of their ancestral loyalties. This ability to mobilize vast populations was a hallmark of the new imperial power and a terrifying testament to its reach. Qin Shi Huang's vision of centralization was total. He sought to control everything: land, people, resources, and even ideas. He understood that true imperial power lay not just in conquering, but in seamlessly integrating the conquered territories into a singular, unchallengeable entity. You feel the pervasive presence of the state, a colossal shadow stretching over every aspect of life. There's no longer anywhere to hide from the emperor's reach. This period of consolidation was a monumental undertaking, fraught with challenges. The sheer size of the empire, the diversity of its populations, the ingrained habits of local autonomy, all had to be overcome. Yet through sheer force of will, meticulous planning, and brutal enforcement, Qin Shi Huang achieved an unprecedented level of centralized control. This foundational act of imperial organization would leave a lasting legacy, shaping the administrative structure of China for millennia to come. It was a testament to his ambition and his unyielding belief that a truly unified empire required absolute, centralized command. You feel the iron fist of his rule, tightening its grip, forging a new identity for the land and its people. With the empire's administration firmly centralized, you now witness the next crucial step in Qin Shi Huang's grand project: the radical standardization measures that would literally redefine how people lived, worked, and communicated across his vast domain. This wasn't just about making things uniform. It was about forging a singular identity for a diverse empire, ensuring that every corner of the land marched to the beat of the same imperial drum. Imagine trying to get every country in the world to use the same currency, the same electrical outlets, and the same language all at once. That's the ambition we're talking about, and Qin Shi Huang actually pulled it off, at least for a while. One of the most impactful standardizations was the written script. Before Qin unification, the various warring states had developed their own distinct forms of Chinese characters. While they shared common roots, they were often different enough to cause significant communication barriers, making administration and trade across regions incredibly difficult. Think of it like trying to read a text message from your friend if they were using a totally different alphabet, but still calling it English. Qin Shi Huang decreed a unified, simplified script based on the Qin system, known as the Small Seal script. You see scribes painstakingly copying new imperial documents, merchants learning the new characters for their ledgers, and even ordinary people struggling to adapt. This wasn't just about convenience. It was a powerful tool for control, ensuring that imperial decrees were universally understood and that literacy, limited as it was, served the state. Historians still argue whether the standardization of the script was primarily a pragmatic administrative necessity or a deliberate cultural imposition to erase regional identities. Next, you observe the standardization of weights and measures. Imagine a world where a pound in one town weighed something entirely different in the next, or where a foot varied from village to village. This was the chaotic reality of pre-Qin China, a nightmare for taxation, trade, and engineering projects. Qin Shi Huang eliminated this chaos with absolute precision. You see officials traveling through the land, inspecting scales, measuring sticks, and grain containers, ensuring that all conformed to the new imperial standards. For merchants, this was a huge boon, simplifying commerce and reducing fraud. For the state, it ensured fair and accurate taxation and facilitated the large-scale mobilization of resources for massive public works, like, say, a really long wall. It's like finally getting everyone to agree that a kilogram is, in fact, a kilogram everywhere. What a concept! The standardization extended even to the gauge of carts and chariots. This might seem like a quirky tidbit, but its practical implications were enormous. Before unification, different states had carts with varying axle widths. This meant that roads built by one state often had ruts that wouldn't accommodate the carts of another, creating transportation bottlenecks and logistical headaches. Qin Shi Huang mandated a uniform axle width for all carts. You see the imperial decrees, the workshops churning out new wheels, and perhaps even some grumbling from teamsters whose old carts suddenly became road hazards. This seemingly minor detail had a monumental impact, creating a unified road network that allowed for rapid movement of imperial troops, officials, and supplies. It was essentially the world's first universal highway code, enabling faster, more efficient imperial control. Imagine the arguments at the ancient road construction meetings. But my cart's wheels are just so fashionable. Even currency wasn't spared. The various states had their own coinage, often in bizarre shapes, like spades or knives. Qin Shi Huang replaced this confusing array with a single, uniform copper coin, typically round with a square hole in the center. You see these new coins circulating, simplifying economic transactions, and further binding the disparate regions into a single economic entity. This was the bedrock of a unified imperial economy, enabling the state to collect taxes more efficiently and exert greater financial control. It's like replacing a global flea market with a single, massive, federally regulated Walmart. You also feel the imposition of a singular legal code, a direct consequence of legalist philosophy. While we discuss this in the context of centralization, its universal application across all former states was a monumental act of standardization. Local customs and regional laws were largely abolished, replaced by the unyielding, uniform laws of Qin. This meant that the same crime committed in the former state of Chu would incur the same punishment as in the former state of Yan. This provided a degree of consistency, even if that consistency came with a hefty dose of harshness. The very concept of a unified empire was being built not just by conquest, but by these painstaking, sometimes brutal acts of standardization. Every road, every coin, every written character became a physical manifestation of Qin Shi Huang's absolute authority and his vision for a singular all under heaven. He wasn't just the first emperor, he was the first master of uniformity, proving that an empire could be forged not just by force, but by bureaucratic precision. You witness the sheer scale of this logistical undertaking, the immense effort required to enforce these changes across a landmass comparable to modern Europe. It was a testament to his ambition and the formidable power of his centralized state. The old regional differences, though never entirely erased, were systematically suppressed, making way for a new, unified imperial identity. With the empire unified and standardized, you now shift your attention to one of the most monumental and enduring, yet often brutal symbols of Qin Shi Huang's reign, the initiation of the Great Wall. Imagine legions of conscripted laborers, soldiers, and even exiled criminals, toiling ceaselessly across rugged mountains and vast plains, building a colossal defensive barrier against the nomadic tribes of the north. This wasn't a single, continuous wall magically appearing overnight, but rather a colossal undertaking that stitched together and expanded existing fortifications, driven by the emperor's unyielding vision and fear. It's like a DIY project that escalated into building a literal spine across an entire continent, powered by sheer human grit and imperial decree. The threat from the northern nomadic tribes, particularly the Xiongnu, was very real. These highly mobile horsemen were a constant menace, raiding settled agricultural communities, stealing livestock, and causing widespread devastation. While the warring states had built their own defensive walls, they were piecemeal and often localized. Qin Shi Huang, with his unified empire, envisioned a unified defense. He ordered his general, Meng Tian, to lead a massive army and an even larger workforce to the northern frontier. You witness the sheer scale of this mobilization, the lines of men trudging northward, equipped with basic tools and even less hope. You feel the harsh realities of forced labor. This wasn't a cushy government job with benefits. The conditions were brutal. Thousands upon thousands perished from exhaustion, disease, starvation, and exposure to to the unforgiving elements. You see the supervisors, often former soldiers, wielding whips and meting out severe punishments for any perceived laziness or insubordination. The landscape itself is unforgiving. Steep mountain passes, desolate deserts, and freezing winters. It's a testament to the emperor's absolute power that he could compel such immense suffering for his grand project. One mainstream historical fact. Tradition holds that the first sections of the Great Wall under Qin Shi Huang involved connecting and strengthening existing walls built by earlier states, rather than building an entirely new structure from scratch. Although significant new construction certainly took place, it was a massive renovation project, but on a scale that would make any modern contractor weep. The purpose of the wall wasn't just physical defense, it was also a powerful psychological barrier, both for the Chinese and for the nomads. For the empire, it represented a clear demarcation of their territory, a symbol of their unity and strength. For the Xiongnu, it was a tangible obstacle, a declaration that their raiding days might be getting a lot harder. It also served as a vast internal communication and transportation artery, allowing troops and supplies to be moved quickly along the frontier. Think of it as a very, very long, very, very expensive, and very, very deadly border control system. You might observe the diverse methods of construction: rammed earth, stone, and brick, depending on local resources and terrain. Different sections look distinct, reflecting the available materials and the ingenuity or desperation of the local work crews. Some parts are incredibly sturdy, others less so, patched together hastily. It's a patchwork monument to human ambition and suffering. A quirky tidbit you might come across is the popular, albeit apocryphal, legend that the mortar used in some sections of the wall was mixed with sticky rice. While archaeological evidence doesn't fully support widespread use of rice in the main structure, it's a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness attributed to the builders, even under duress. Historians still argue whether the actual effectiveness of the Qin Wall as a defensive barrier justified the immense human cost, given that nomadic incursions still occurred and the wall was later bypassed. The human cost was staggering. Folklore speaks of countless bodies buried within the wall itself, adding to its legendary grimness. While this is likely an exaggeration, it captures the popular memory of the unimaginable toil and loss of life. You hear the mournful work songs, the creak of timber, the incessant hammering, all against the backdrop of the howling wind. It's a stark reminder that behind every grand monument lies the sweat, tears, and often the lives of ordinary people. Imagine enduring years of forced labor, miles from home, knowing that a single slip could mean plummeting to your death, all for a wall that may or may not even keep the barbarians out. It's enough to make you question the meaning of legacy. General Meng Tian, leading the military forces and overseeing the construction, was a formidable figure. You might see him riding along the frontier, overseeing the immense operation, his presence a constant reminder of the emperor's will. The troops under his command weren't just protecting the wall, they were also enforcing the labor, ensuring that the work continued at an unflagging pace. It was a military occupation as much as a construction project. The scale of the Qin Wall, even its initial phase, was immense. It stretched for thousands of kilometers, traversing deserts, mountains, and rivers. This was not just a line in the sand. It was a permanent declaration of the empire's northern boundary, a physical manifestation of Qin Shi Huang's desire to define and control his dominion. It embodied his grand vision: total control, total defense, total unification. As you stand on a newly completed section of the wall, looking out at the vast, wild lands to the north, you feel the chill of the wind and the weight of history. This wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a psychological one, separating the civilized world of the empire from the barbarian wilderness beyond. It stands as a testament to the first emperor's ambition, his foresight, and his terrifying willingness to sacrifice untold lives for his vision. It's a harsh, enduring monument, a silent witness to the brutal price of imperial security. With the Great Wall's construction underway and the empire's physical boundaries being defined, you now witness a darker, more chilling aspect of Qin Shi Huang's rule: the suppression of dissent. This wasn't just about silencing critics. It was a systematic attempt to control thought itself, to eradicate any ideas that challenged the emperor's absolute authority or the legalist ideology that underpinned his regime. Imagine a world where wrongthink isn't just frowned upon, but actively hunted down and destroyed, often with brutal efficiency. It's like a massive ideological spring cleaning, but instead of throwing out old clothes, they're throwing out ideas and the people who held them. Qin Shi Huang, having unified China through military might and administrative ruthlessness, understood that ideological unity was just as crucial for maintaining his empire. The various warring states had been cradles of diverse philosophical schools: Confucianism, Taoism, Mohism, and many others. While legalism was the Qin's guiding principle, these other schools still had adherents, scholars, and texts that offered alternative visions for society, governance, and morality. To the first emperor, these differing viewpoints represented potential seeds of rebellion, cracks in the edifice of his absolute power. He wanted one voice, one truth, and that voice was his. The most infamous act of this intellectual purge was the burning of books and burying of scholars, Fenshu Kengru, which largely occurred in 213 BCE. You hear the imperial decrees, stark and unforgiving. With the exception of books on agriculture, medicine, divination, and the history of Qin itself, virtually all other philosophical and historical texts from the conquered states were ordered to be collected and burned. Imagine the libraries, the carefully preserved bamboo slips and silk scrolls being piled high and set ablaze. The smoke of burning knowledge billows across the land, a visible symbol of intellectual suffocation. This wasn't just about destroying physical objects. It was about erasing memory, severing ties to a past that might offer alternatives to the present. You might feel a shiver of horror as you witness this. The loss of ancient wisdom, diverse perspectives, and centuries of accumulated thought is immense. It's like destroying the internet, but only keeping the parts that tell you how to grow potatoes and patch up a cut. Historians still argue whether the scale of the book burning was as absolute as later accounts suggest, or if some texts survived in private collections and were later recovered. Nevertheless, the intent was clear: to create a tabula rasa, a blank slate upon which the emperor's vision could be indelibly inscribed without intellectual challenge. The burying of scholars component is even more chilling. According to tradition, in 212 BCE, after some scholars criticized his rule, Qin Shi Huang allegedly ordered around 460 Confucian scholars to be buried alive. You might imagine the horrified murmurs, the desperate pleas, the brutal efficiency of the executioners. Whether this event was precisely as depicted or embellished by later, often anti-Qin historians, it serves as a powerful testament to the emperor's willingness to use extreme violence to enforce intellectual conformity. It sent a clear message. Challenging the emperor's authority with words was as dangerous as challenging him with swords. A quirky tidbit that illuminates the emperor's paranoia. He reportedly had a particular aversion to discussion of the past, especially if it involved praising earlier rulers. Anyone who used historical examples to critique his present rule was considered a threat. This is why official history was controlled so tightly, and why even seemingly innocuous historical anecdotes could lead to severe punishment. It's like trying to have a political debate with someone who insists that only their ideas are valid, and anyone who mentions historical precedents for different ideas gets sent to the timeout corner permanently. You observe the pervasive atmosphere of fear that descends upon the intellectual class. Scholars either fled, went into hiding, or adapted their work to conform to imperial dictates. The era of vibrant philosophical debate, which had characterized the Warring States period, abruptly ended. Education, what little of it there was for the common person, became focused on practical skills and adherence to legalist principles. The state became the sole arbiter of truth, and critical thinking was deemed seditious. The suppression wasn't just about books and scholars. It extended to any form of public expression that could be interpreted as disloyal. You see imperial censors scrutinizing everything from popular songs to local festivals, ensuring that no subversive messages could take root. Informers were encouraged, creating a climate of suspicion where even private conversations could be dangerous. It's a testament to the comprehensive nature of his control, reaching into the very minds of his subjects. One mainstream historical fact to underscore this suppression: the Qin Dynasty itself relied heavily on the very scholars and educated administrators it sometimes persecuted. The irony was not lost on later generations. While they were purging dissenting thought, they needed educated individuals to run the vast bureaucracy, manage the public works, and collect the taxes. It was a delicate, often contradictory balance. As you move through this era, you feel the weight of silence. The lively debates are gone, replaced by a suffocating intellectual conformity. While the emperor succeeded in imposing a temporary ideological uniformity, the long-term consequences were complex. The systematic destruction of texts meant that much ancient knowledge was irrevocably lost, and later dynasties would have to painstakingly reconstruct or rediscover what they could. It also fostered a deep resentment among the intellectual class, a resentment that would contribute to the Qin Dynasty's eventual downfall. This period of intellectual repression reveals the dark underbelly of absolute power. Qin Shi Huang desired not just control over bodies and land, but over minds and ideas. He saw knowledge as a weapon, and he wanted to ensure that only he wielded it. You feel the chilling effectiveness of this strategy, even as you mourn the loss of the vibrant intellectual landscape that preceded it. The empire was unified, standardized, and now profoundly silenced. Having consolidated his empire, standardized its systems, and ruthlessly suppressed dissent, you now witness the first emperor's growing obsession with a very personal yet universally human desire, the quest for immortality. Imagine a man who has achieved unparalleled power, united an entire world, and built monumental structures, suddenly confronting the one enemy he cannot conquer: death. You feel the creeping paranoia that begins to consume him, driving him to increasingly desperate and fantastical measures. It's like watching a super-rich mogul who's bought everything suddenly decide they want to buy eternal life. Qin Shi Huang's fear of death seems to have intensified significantly as his reign progressed. He had conquered states, controlled armies, and even attempted to master thought. But the undeniable march of time and the fragility of his own mortality gnawed at him. You might overhear whispers of his declining health, perhaps exacerbated by the immense stress of ruling such a vast empire and his increasing reliance on isolation. His pursuit of an eternal life wasn't just a personal whim. It became a full-blown state enterprise. He dispatched numerous expeditions in search of legendary elixirs of life and mythical islands inhabited by immortals. One of the most famous and certainly quirky expeditions was led by a court alchemist named Shu Fu. You might see him presenting his grand plan to the emperor, a voyage to the mythical lands of Penglai, Fangjiang, and Yingzhou in the eastern seas, where immortals supposedly resided, guarding the secret to eternal life. Qin Shi Huang, ever the pragmatist with a dash of desperate hope, funded these expeditions generously. Shu Fu reportedly sailed with thousands of young men and women, as well as craftsmen and seeds, supposedly to serve the immortals and bring back the elixir. Legend has it he never returned, perhaps settling on one of the Japanese islands, becoming a sort of mythical colonizer. Imagine launching a massive sea expedition just to find a magical smoothie. Historians still argue whether Shu Fu's voyage was a genuine attempt to find immortality or a clever ploy by Shu Fu to escape the increasingly tyrannical emperor. You also observe the proliferation of alchemists and sorcerers at the imperial court. These individuals, often charlatans but sometimes genuine practitioners of early chemistry, promised various concoctions and mystical rituals to extend the emperor's life. You might see strange experiments, bubbling cauldrons, and elaborate ceremonies designed to appease spirits or extract life-giving essences. Many of these elixirs, ironically, likely contained toxic substances like mercury and lead, substances that, far from granting immortality, would have almost certainly contributed to the emperor's declining health and increasing erratic behavior. It's a grim irony. The very things he consumed to live forever were probably accelerating his demise. His growing paranoia also manifested in increased seclusion. He began to avoid public appearances, making his movements secretive and unpredictable. He reportedly built a network of interconnecting underground tunnels between his palaces to make it impossible for assassins to track him. Anyone who revealed his location faced severe punishment. You might hear stories of court officials being executed for accidentally revealing the emperor's whereabouts. This extreme isolation, coupled with his search for immortality, created an almost mythical aura around him in his later years, further cementing his image as something more than human, even as he was clearly battling his own humanity. One mainstream historical fact that underscores his obsession is the sheer scale of the imperial tomb he commissioned for himself. Even while seeking immortality, he was meticulously preparing for the afterlife, just in case. The tomb complex, about which we'll delve deeper later, was designed to be a subterranean replica of his empire, a cosmic guarantee of his eternal reign. This monumental project, employing hundreds of thousands of laborers over decades, speaks volumes about his conviction that his power would extend even beyond death. You might witness his fervent interest in divination and geomancy. The emperor believed deeply in omens and the influence of cosmic forces. He consulted diviners regularly, seeking auspicious dates for journeys, construction projects, and military campaigns. His tours of the empire, which became increasingly frequent in his later years, were often justified by the need to perform sacrifices to mountains and rivers, seeking blessings for his reign and, implicitly, for his eternal life. He saw himself not just as a human ruler, but as a cosmic pivot, responsible for maintaining harmony between heaven and earth. The quest for immortality wasn't merely a personal eccentricity, it deeply influenced his governance. Resources were diverted to fund these expeditions and experiments. Officials were tasked with finding rare herbs and minerals. The very fabric of the empire was bent to serve his ultimate, unattainable desire. You see the toll this takes, not just on the emperor himself, but on the court and the populace, who are forced to participate in this grand, futile quest. As you observe Qin Shi Huang in these later years, there's a sense of tragedy mixed with his imposing power. He has achieved everything a mortal ruler could dream of, yet he cannot escape the one universal truth. His ambition, which forged an empire, now drives him into a desperate, ultimately futile struggle against nature itself. The elixirs promise eternal life, but deliver only increased paranoia and ill health. The expeditions search for mythical lands, but find only the vast, indifferent ocean. You feel the weight of his unfulfilled desire, a poignant counterpoint to the absolute authority he wields. While Qin Shi Huang was increasingly consumed by his quest for immortality, a more tangible and truly awe-inspiring project was taking shape, one destined to protect him even in death: the Terracotta Army. You now find yourself transported to a vast, silent necropolis, a subterranean world painstakingly crafted to accompany the first emperor into the afterlife. This isn't just a tomb, it's an entire imperial guard, a silent legion of warriors, horses, and chariots, frozen in time, ready to serve their emperor for eternity. It's like the ultimate posthumous mic drop, ensuring your eternal security deposit is fully covered. The sheer scale of this undertaking is almost unimaginable. The construction of the emperor's mausoleum complex began almost immediately after he ascended the throne, decades before his death. It was designed to be a miniature version of his empire, a cosmic guarantee of his continued reign in the underworld. The Terracotta Army is just one, albeit the most famous component of this colossal tomb. You stand in one of the unearthed pits, surrounded by thousands of these life-sized figures, and the feeling is truly overwhelming. Each soldier, horse, and chariot is unique. You examine the faces, and no two are exactly alike, suggesting they were modeled from real individuals, or at least given distinct features. Their elaborate hairstyles, their meticulously detailed armor, the very creases in their clothing. It's a level of artistry and dedication that beggars belief. This wasn't mass production in the modern sense. It was individualized craftsmanship on a scale never before seen. A mainstream historical fact. It is estimated that the three main pits of the Terracotta Army contain over 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots with 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, all painstakingly created from clay. And that's just the ones discovered so far. You observe the precise military formations in which they are arranged: infantry lines, archers, cavalry, and commanders, all facing east, ready to defend the emperor from any threats arising from the conquered states. It's a silent army, but its implied power is deafening. The sheer logistical challenge of producing these figures, firing them in kilns, and then arranging them in their subterranean formations is mind-boggling. It required an immense workforce of artisans, laborers, and engineers, toiling ceaselessly for decades. The figures were originally painted in vibrant colors: reds, blues, greens, yellows, though much of this pigment has faded or flaked away since their excavation. Imagine the sight when they were first interred, a rainbow army standing vigil in the dark earth. This quirky tidbit reminds you that what we see today in muted terracotta is merely a shadow of their original splendor. It's like finding a faded old photograph and trying to imagine the vibrant life that once pulsed within it. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the Terracotta Army was defensive, protecting the tomb, or offensive, enabling the emperor to conquer the underworld. Perhaps it was both, a true expression of his multifaceted ambitions. The scale of the entire mausoleum complex is even grander than the army itself. The pits of the terracotta warriors are located nearly 1.5 miles from the actual burial mound of Qin Huang, which itself contains a vast, unexplored palace, chambers filled with treasures, and according to historical accounts, rivers of mercury flowing by mechanical means, representing the rivers and seas of his empire. You feel a sense of profound mystery surrounding the central tomb, a place that no human eyes have seen since its sealing over 2 millennia ago. The technology required for such intricate mechanisms and the sheer volume of mercury, a highly toxic substance, speaks to the immense resources and scientific knowledge applied to this final resting place. The construction of the mausoleum complex, including the Terracotta Army, was a major source of forced labor during Qin Shi Huang's reign. You might imagine the conscripted farmers and artisans torn from their homes, working under harsh conditions, knowing that failure to meet quotas could mean severe punishment. It was a testament to the emperor's unyielding will that he could command such an immense portion of his empire's human and material resources for a single post-mortem project. It's enough to make you think twice about complaining about your office commute. As you walk among these silent guardians, you can't help but ponder the mind of the man who conceived them. Qin Shi Huang, for all his ruthlessness and paranoia, possessed an unparalleled vision. He didn't just want to be buried, he wanted to reign forever. The Terracotta Army is a powerful symbol of his ambition, his belief in a unified empire that would transcend even death, and his absolute refusal to relinquish control. It's a chilling monument to one man's ego, but also an extraordinary testament to human ingenuity and artistic skill, even when wielded for the purposes of an absolute monarch. You feel the silence in these pits, a profound quiet that speaks of centuries, of ambition, and of dust. The Terracotta Army remains, a silent, enduring testament to the first emperor's monumental vision, a stark reminder that even in death, his desire for eternal power knew no bounds. It's a truly humbling experience, standing amidst the ghost of an empire, ready to rise at its master's command. As his monumental tomb continued its silent construction, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, found himself increasingly restless and consumed by a deepening paranoia. You now accompany him on his elaborate imperial tours and observe the role of omens in his increasingly superstitious worldview. These were not leisurely vacations. They were grand, meticulously planned spectacles designed to project his absolute authority across the vastness of his empire, while also serving as desperate searches for auspicious signs and perhaps the elusive elixir of life. It's like a never-ending presidential campaign trail, but with more sacrifices to mountains and considerably higher stakes for anyone who messes up. The emperor undertook numerous extensive tours across his domain, venturing far from his capital, Xianyang. You see the immense retinues accompanying him, thousands of soldiers, officials, servants, and even artisans. The roads built for his armies and administrative efficiency now served as grand avenues for imperial processionals. His movements were often kept secret to prevent assassination attempts, but his presence, when revealed, was intended to be awe-inspiring. He would stop at various significant locations, often ancient sacred sites, to perform rituals and offer sacrifices. One mainstream historical fact about these tours is the emperor's habit of inscribing steles, stone tablets, at various prominent mountains and coastal areas. These inscriptions served as permanent declarations of his achievements, glorifying his unification of China and reiterating his divine mandate. You might observe the laborious process of carving these proclamations into stone, a physical manifestation of his desire to leave an indelible mark on history. These steles weren't just vanity projects. They were instruments of imperial propaganda, ensuring that future generations, and indeed his contemporaries, understood the absolute nature of his rule and the cosmic significance of his reign. His personal quest for immortality intertwined deeply with these tours. Many of these journeys were ostensibly undertaken to seek out legendary immortals or to find rare herbs and minerals that could prolong his life. You might witness him dispatching emissaries to remote islands off the coast, following up on the rumors of Shu Fu's elusive pursuit. His belief in omens and portents grew stronger with time. He would consult diviners, interpret unusual natural phenomena, and seek out auspicious signs to confirm his destiny and calm his growing anxieties. A quirky tidbit: it is said that during one of his tours, a large meteor fell, and someone inscribed it with words criticizing the emperor. Qin Shi Huang, deeply disturbed by this omen, had every person living nearby executed, and the meteor itself pulverized. Talk about being a sensitive soul. This increasing reliance on divination and the search for magical elixirs also fed his paranoia. He became convinced that malevolent spirits or hidden enemies were constantly plotting against him. His trust in those around him dwindled, and his temper became increasingly volatile. You might witness the fear in the eyes of his courtiers, who had to navigate his increasingly unpredictable moods and dangerous suspicions. The stakes for delivering bad news were incredibly high, leading to a culture of sycophancy where few dared to contradict the emperor. Historians still argue whether Qin Shi Huang's paranoia was a result of his genuine belief in supernatural threats, the constant real danger of assassination. Remember Jinkei, or perhaps even the effects of the mercury-laden elixirs he consumed in his quest for eternal life. It's a fascinating chicken-and-egg question, but the undeniable outcome was an increasingly isolated and suspicious ruler. During these tours, the emperor also took the opportunity to inspect his vast new infrastructure. You might see him examining sections of the Great Wall, inspecting newly standardized roads, or overseeing agricultural projects. These inspections reinforced his centralized control, ensuring that his decrees were being implemented efficiently across the land. He was a micromanager on a macro scale, personally overseeing the details of his massive empire. Despite the grand spectacle of his tours, there was a palpable sense of unease, a tension that always accompanied the first emperor. The constant threat of assassination, the brutal suppression of dissent, and his own increasingly erratic behavior cast a long shadow. His journeys, meant to display his power and secure his immortality, inadvertently revealed his deepening isolation and the immense burden of his absolute rule. You sense the weariness beneath the emperor's imposing facade, the constant vigilance, the relentless pressure of maintaining all under heaven. His quest for immortality was ultimately a futile attempt to escape the inevitable, a desperate final act for a man who had conquered everything but himself. These imperial tours, while demonstrating his immense power, also serve as a tragic prelude to his ultimate demise, hinting at the exhaustion and vulnerability that lay beneath the imperial regalia. Despite his relentless pursuit of immortality and the grand spectacle of his imperial tours, the inevitable finally catches up to Qin Shi Huang. You witness the final mysterious act of his life, Qin Shi Huang's demise. Imagine the most powerful man in the world, surrounded by layers of protection and pursuing every possible avenue to cheat death, ultimately succumbing to the one force no emperor, no matter how absolute, can defeat. It's like watching a meticulously crafted machine finally run out of steam, not with a bang, but with a quiet, unsettling wheeze. The first emperor's health had been in decline for some time, likely exacerbated by his increasing paranoia and the very mercury-laden elixirs he consumed, believing them to be keys to eternal life. By 210 BCE, during one of his extensive imperial tours, his condition worsened significantly. He was far from his capital, in the eastern commandery of Shaqiu, near modern-day Xingtai, Hebei province. This remote location, while intended to be secure, would become the stage for a critical moment in history. You feel the palpable tension among his inner circle. Only a few trusted individuals were privy to his deteriorating state. The chief eunuch, Zhao Gao, who had become a close confidant and tutor to his youngest son, Hu Hai, and the Prime Minister, Li Si, a brilliant legalist statesman who had served the emperor for decades. These two figures would play pivotal roles in the immediate aftermath of his death, twisting the fate of the empire to serve their own ambitions. Qin Shi Huang died in September 210 BCE. The exact cause of his death remains a subject of historical debate. Was it illness, the culmination of mercury poisoning, or perhaps a more sinister plot? Historians still argue whether his final demise was natural or if the toxic elixirs he consumed ultimately sealed his fate. You might imagine the secretive atmosphere, the hushed conversations, the desperate attempts to keep his death a secret from the general populace, and crucially, from his eldest son and designated heir, Fusu. The decision was made, primarily by Zhao Gao and Li Si, to conceal the emperor's death. This was a monumental deception, driven by their desire to manipulate the succession for their own benefit. Fusu, the eldest son, was known for his more compassionate nature and had even dared to criticize his father's harsh policies, especially the persecution of scholars and the forced labor on the Great Wall. This made him an undesirable heir for Zhao Gao, who feared Fusu would replace him, and for Li Si, who worried about losing his powerful position under a less autocratic ruler. You witnessed the elaborate charade that unfolded. The emperor's body was placed in a sealed carriage, surrounded by carts filled with salted fish to mask the decomposing smell. Imperial decrees continued to be issued in his name, with Zhao Gao forging the instructions. Every effort was made to maintain the illusion that the emperor was still alive, merely unwell and unable to see visitors. It's a macabre road trip, a silent, decaying emperor pulled across the landscape, while the future of an empire hangs in the balance. A quirky tidbit about this bizarre journey: Zhao Gao reportedly had an official constantly reply to imperial inquiries from the carriage, mimicking the emperor's voice, further prolonging the deception. Imagine having to do that for weeks. Meanwhile, Zhao Gao and Li Si secretly composed a forged imperial edict. This false decree ordered Fusu, the rightful heir, to commit suicide, accusing him of disloyalty and lack of filial piety. It also named Hu Hai, the younger, more malleable son, as the new emperor. You feel the cold, calculating cruelty of this act, the sheer audacity of two men hijacking the imperial succession. When the edict reached Fusu, he, believing it to be his father's genuine command, tragically carried out the order and took his own life. This moment effectively decapitated the legitimate succession and paved the way for a puppet emperor. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the significance of this deception: the concealment of Qin Shi Huang's death and the subsequent forged edict directly led to the elevation of Hu Hai, a less capable and more easily manipulated ruler, and arguably accelerated the downfall of the Qin Dynasty. Had Fusu taken the throne, the dynasty might have endured longer, perhaps softening some of its harshest policies. As the news of the emperor's death finally broke, months after the event, and with Hu Hai already on the throne, the empire reacted with a mixture of grief, fear, and a growing sense of unease. The man who had unified all under heaven, who had built an empire of unprecedented power, had vanished, not into immortality as he had hoped, but into the silent depths of his vast tomb. His elaborate preparations for the afterlife, the Terracotta Army, and his vast mausoleum were now the only witnesses to his eternal repose. His demise, shrouded in secrecy and manipulation, left a power vacuum that would quickly lead to chaos. The first emperor's iron will had held the empire together, but without it, and with a weak successor on the throne, the meticulously built edifice began to crack. You feel the profound consequences of his final moments, a single man's death, unleashing a torrent of unforeseen events that would soon sweep away the dynasty he had so painstakingly built. The legacy of Qin Shi Huang was immense, but his personal end, tragically, was a precursor to the end of his entire imperial dream. With Qin Shi Huang's death shrouded in secrecy and his legitimate heir removed through deceit, you now witness the disastrous fallout, the manipulative dance of eunuchs and succession that quickly destabilizes the newly formed empire. Imagine a powerful empire built on an iron will, suddenly adrift with a puppet on the throne, controlled by ambitious schemers who care more for their own power than the stability of the realm. It's like a corporate board meeting where the CEO is a dummy and the real power brokers are playing a game of musical chairs with daggers. The key players in this immediate aftermath are the chief eunuch Zhao Gao and the prime minister Li Si. Remember how they forged the imperial edict condemning Fusu and elevating Hu Hai? Now, you see them in full control of the levers of power, orchestrating the early reign of the new emperor, Qin Shi, meaning second-generation emperor, also known as Hu Hai. Hu Hai was, by all accounts, a far cry from his formidable father. He was young, pleasure-loving, and deeply influenced by Zhao Gao, his former tutor. You might observe his disinterest in governance, his preference for hunting and lavish entertainment, and his willingness to delegate authority to Zhao Gao. This suited the ambitious eunuch perfectly. Zhao Gao, recognizing the emperor's weakness, systematically consolidated his own power, gradually isolating Hu Hai from other officials and controlling all access to the throne. It's a classic power grab, where the puppet master makes sure the puppet never looks behind the curtain. Li Si, the prime minister, was initially complicit in the deception, likely believing he could maintain his own influence. However, you soon observe the growing tension between him and Zhao Gao. Zhao Gao, a master manipulator, began to sow discord, planting rumors and accusing Li Si of disloyalty to the emperor. Li Si, a brilliant legalist statesman who had served Qin Shi Huang faithfully, found himself trapped in a web of intrigue, unable to escape the machinations of the ruthless eunuch. It's like being caught in a slow-motion political thriller where you know the good guy is doomed. One mainstream historical fact that illustrates Zhao Gao's cunning was the pointing to a deer as a horse incident, Jilu Wei Ma. Zhao Gao, wanting to test the loyalty of the court officials and expose those who might oppose him, presented a deer to the emperor and declared it was a horse. When some officials dared to correct him, saying it was clearly a deer, Zhao Gao had them secretly punished or executed. This act demonstrated his absolute control over the narrative and instilled profound fear, ensuring that no one would openly contradict him, even when faced with an obvious falsehood. You might feel the chilling effect of such an act, where truth itself becomes a dangerous luxury. You witness the increasing instability at court. Hu Hai, guided by Zhao Gao, continued his father's harsh policies, but lacked his father's strategic vision or effectiveness. Public works projects, like the massive expansion of the Yipang Palace, continued unabated, draining the empire's resources and infuriating the populace. The conscription of labor and military service became even more onerous. Taxes soared. The brutal punishments of legalism were applied with arbitrary cruelty, leading to widespread resentment and fear. A quirky tidbit about Zhao Gao's power: he reportedly controlled the imperial seal, essentially the ultimate symbol of authority, and would often issue edicts in the emperor's name without his direct knowledge. Imagine your assistant having access to your signature and bank account, and just deciding to spend it all on their own lavish lifestyle. This level of unchecked power was unprecedented for a eunuch in a Chinese court, and it spoke volumes about Hu Hai's weakness and Zhao Gao's ruthless ambition. Historians still argue whether Zhao Gao's ultimate goal was to usurp the throne himself or simply to wield absolute power through a figurehead. The constant purges and executions at court decimated the remaining loyal officials and experienced administrators. Anyone who spoke out against Zhao Gao's influence or even hinted at the mismanagement of the empire was swiftly eliminated. Li Si himself eventually fell victim to Zhao Gao's machinations, accused of treason and brutally executed, along with his entire family. You might witness the tragic end of a man who, despite his own flaws, had been instrumental in building the Qin Empire, now destroyed by the very system of ruthless power he helped establish. As the court spiraled into paranoia and self-serving intrigue, the stability of the empire began to unravel from within. The strength of the Qin Dynasty had always rested on the emperor's absolute personal authority and the efficiency of its legalist administration. With a weak, easily manipulated emperor and a corrupt eunuch pulling the strings, the central government lost its cohesion and its capacity to respond effectively to growing unrest. You hear the whispers of discontent growing louder outside the palace walls. Rebellions, which had been sporadic and easily suppressed under Qin Shi Huang, began to erupt with greater frequency and intensity. The populace, burdened by endless labor, crushing taxes, and arbitrary justice, had reached its breaking point. The facade of imperial power, once so impenetrable, was now cracking. The manipulations within the imperial court, driven by the personal ambitions of Zhao Gao and the weakness of Hu Hai, were a critical factor in eroding the very foundations of the Qin Empire. The stage was set for a much larger, more violent storm to sweep away the remnants of the first emperor's once unyielding legacy. The tragic farce of eunuchs and puppet emperors quickly gives way to the inevitable crescendo: rebellion and collapse. You now witness the unraveling of the mighty Qin Dynasty, the empire forged in fire and ambition, as it crumbles under the weight of popular uprising and the sheer incompetence of its second emperor. Imagine a meticulously built house, standing tall for years, suddenly facing a perfect storm of internal rot and external battering, finally toppling down in a spectacular, if tragic, cascade. The seeds of rebellion were sown deep within the harsh policies of Qin Shi Huang, nurtured by the arbitrary cruelty of Hu Hai and Zhao Gao. Remember those endless public works, the crushing taxes, the brutal legalist punishments, and the constant forced conscription for military service and the Great Wall. The populace, pushed to its breaking point, simply had nowhere left to go. The social contract, if one could even call it that under Qin, was shattered. The first major spark of rebellion ignites in 209 BCE, less than a year after Qin Shi Huang's death. You see the story of Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, two humble conscripted soldiers. They were part of a group ordered to march to a frontier outpost, but heavy rains and floods delayed them, making it impossible to arrive on time. Under Qin law, being late for military duty, regardless of the reason, was punishable by death. Faced with certain execution, they realized they had nothing to lose. If we die for a great cause. Chen Sheng reportedly declared, "Are kings and nobles born great?" You hear the cries of desperation and defiance as they raise the banner of revolt, their small act of rebellion quickly spiraling into a massive popular uprising. This mainstream historical fact marks the true beginning of the end for Qin. Their rebellion, though ultimately suppressed, lit a fuse across the empire. Soon, other rebellions erupted, led by various figures, some from the old aristocratic families of the conquered states seeking to restore their former glory, others from common backgrounds fueled by sheer desperation. You see the old loyalties, supposedly erased by Qin Shi Huang, resurfacing with a vengeance. The people of Chu, Qi, and Yan, once unified under the Qin banner, now rallied under their own ancestral flags, driven by a desire for vengeance and autonomy. It's like all the disparate pieces of that puzzle box we talked about suddenly deciding they'd rather go back to being their own distinct pictures. The Qin court, consumed by its internal power struggles, was ill-equipped to deal with this widespread unrest. Hu Hai, increasingly isolated and fearful, relied even more heavily on Zhao Gao, who ruthlessly purged anyone he perceived as a threat, further weakening the government's ability to respond. You might observe the complete disconnect between the imperial palace, with its lavish banquets and murderous intrigues, and the burning countryside, where peasant armies were gaining strength. It's a vivid illustration of a regime losing touch with the reality of its subjects. One particularly significant figure to emerge was Liu Bang, a humble village headman from a common background. You see him gathering followers, his charisma and pragmatic leadership appealing to those tired of tyranny. Another, from the old Chu aristocracy, was Xiang Yu, a powerful and charismatic general, known for his military prowess and ruthless determination. These two would become the primary contenders in the struggle that followed the Qin's collapse, eventually leading to the founding of the Han Dynasty. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates Zhao Gao's final, desperate act of manipulation. Fearing the growing rebellions and the possibility of being overthrown, Zhao Gao eventually engineered a plot to force Emperor Hu Hai to commit suicide. He was effectively killed by his own chief eunuch, the very man who had helped him ascend to the throne. Zhao Gao then briefly placed Ziying, a nephew of Hu Hai, on the throne. Zhao Gao briefly considered making himself emperor, but he was reportedly dissuaded by the realization that even he, the ultimate puppeteer, would not be accepted by the people or the remaining Qin loyalists. This final brutal betrayal brought the imperial court to its lowest point, consumed by its own venom. Historians still argue whether Zhao Gao truly intended to take the throne, or if his machinations were solely focused on self-preservation. The end came swiftly. The rebel armies, now unified under capable leaders, closed in on Xianyang, the Qin capital. The last Qin emperor, Ziying, realizing the futility of resistance, surrendered to Liu Bang in 206 BCE. You witness the symbolic moment, the end of the Qin Dynasty, a mere 15 years after its glorious, brutal unification. The first emperor's dream of a dynasty, lasting 10,000 generations, crumbled within 2. The collapse was not just a political event, it was a societal upheaval. The strict legalist order dissolved into chaos, and the land was once again plunged into civil war. Though this time, it was a struggle between competing rebel factions rather than the old states. The uniform systems Qin Shi Huang had so painstakingly implemented, the standardized script, weights, and measures, largely endured, a testament to their practicality. But the oppressive regime that enforced them was utterly swept away. You feel the profound sense of release, mixed with the lingering fear. The tyranny is over, but what comes next? The Qin Dynasty, for all its innovations and monumental achievements, ultimately failed because of its brutality and its inability to adapt. It showed that immense power, without popular consent or a degree of compassion, can be a brittle thing, easily shattered by the very people it sought to control. The empire that rose from the ashes of chaos ultimately returned to it, proving that even the most formidable of wills cannot command the hearts of a people indefinitely.